Here's an advice to a 30-year-old. Don't be a donkey. And that is the topic of today's podcast. How to not be a donkey, aka roam around in life pointlessly, not knowing your direction. So yeah, let's get into it. So I recently came across this post from Tim Ferriss. And here's the thing. The idea was this. It was a fantastic piece of post, right? And this is something that I always thought about, but this analogy and this story was so good that I had to sort of dedicate an entire podcast to it. I am sure it's going to be extremely helpful for a lot of people. Disclaimer, there's going to be a lot of noise on this podcast. It's just weird traffic on the outside. You can hear the birds chirping for some reason. So, well, deal with it, folks. That's the podcast, right? So here's the thing. The idea was this, right? So Tim Ferriss, the author, has a podcast, he himself, and he invited this guy named Derek. I think it's Derek Sivers. I think he's got a lot of good ideas. Anyways, Tim asked him, what advice would you give to your 30-year-old self? Now, Derek, by the way, successful guy, sold his company to Apple. I think, yes, he invented a company, CD Baby sold his company. And he was like, Derek, right? When Tim asked him, he said, and I'm going to read this, don't be a donkey. Tim was like, what does that mean? Derek goes like, oh, all right. Well, I meet a lot of 30-year-olds who are trying to pursue many different directions at once, but not making any progress in any direction, right? They get frustrated that the world wants them to pick one thing because they want to do them all. Why do I have to choose? I don't want to choose, they say. But the problem is, if you're thinking short term, then you act as though if you don't do all of them at this week, they won't happen. And the solution is to think long term. Again, my sort of commentary on this thing, sort of end quote. So basically, right, the idea is this, right? A lot of folks, I'm not 30 yet, I'm going to turn 30 in 1 year. So that is crazy. This one resonated with me, even though I have sort of lessened my ability to be a donkey over the years. But I'm still a donkey to some degree. Get distracted by so many things and I just chase after so many things. And the solution, and I can sort of relate the problem, which is this. We want to do everything this week, this month, this season, or this year, right? So that is the biggest problem right there. And yeah, Derek's on point right here. Anyway, starting quote, back to what Derek's saying. To realize that you can do one of these things for a few years and then do one for a few years and then another. You've probably heard of the fable, I think it's called The Buridan's Ass, about a donkey who is standing halfway between a pile of hay and a bucket of water. He's thirsty and he's hungry. He just keeps looking left to the hay and right to the water, trying to decide, hay or water, hay or water, and he's unable to decide. So eventually he falls over and dies, both of hunger and thirst. A donkey can't think of the future. If he did, he'd realize he could clearly go for his drink of water and then go eat the hay. So my advice to the 30-year-old self is this. Don't be a donkey. You can do everything you want to do. You just need foresight and patience. That's a solid freaking piece of thing. It was so good. I had to sort of share it on my newsletter and probably actually I had this idea to make an animated thing on this whole concept of the Buridan's ass. You might have heard of the story, you know. I had this short film idea in mind. I was sort of storyboarded it in my head, obviously, a couple of months ago. And then I sort of saw it in this context, which I was actually thinking. I was like, I was not making a decision. And for a very long time. So personally, backstory, I was trying to make a decision in terms of the way I want to go with my business or with the art side of things, for the past 1.5 years. And I wasted a lot of time sort of trying to decide, experimenting. I mean, experimenting is good. If you're experimenting, that means you're trying out the decision and sort of taking it for a trial run. But most of the time, I was not experimenting, but rather I was simply trying to go from one to another, and I was constantly jumping from one decision to another. I would make a decision and then I would go back, make a decision, go back, because I simply did not have the clarity or the foresight or the patience to know that I can actually do most of these things in the long term, the longer run. So back to the stuff, right? Back to the thing. Anyways, my thing is, this podcast, I just didn't want to end it here. I was like, how not to be a donkey, right? What are 3 to 4 ways that I can actually start incorporating from this day on how not to be a donkey? And I came up with 4 things, right? So first one is this: think short term. If you want to be a donkey, constantly going around trying to sort of make a decision but not making any, then the first thing that you need to do is this. Sorry, this is not how not to be a donkey. How to be a donkey. That's what this thing is. You got to think short term, right? If you want to be a donkey, think short term. That means think that you want to achieve everything that you want to do in this day or this week or this month. There is no semblance of balance. There is this idea from the book called The One Thing about the idea that balance is a myth. You don't balance things on a given day or week or month. You balance things over the years, right? Like you counterbalance things. And that is one of the greatest ideas that I've ever heard, and sort of resonates with that, right? You think short term and you try to balance things on a given day, but what you actually do is balance things over a long term. The next one is this: don't look at life in seasons. If you want to be a donkey, don't look at life in seasons. So what does that mean? You look at life in 3 months, 6 months chunks or year chunks. Like the next 2 years is a season of me working on this. The next something else is a season of me working on that. You don't look at life in seasons, but rather you just look at life in days, weeks, and months. And that's the way you be a donkey. Finally, the last way to be a donkey is don't make a decision. Then that means there are 2 kinds of decisions. One is a reversible decision and 2 is an irreversible decision. A reversible decision, most decisions are quite honestly reversible in my opinion. I think, right? Do I actually believe that? Let me see. My actions don't map to that belief, but I do think, at least at this point in time, that most decisions are reversible. It's just scary, These reversible decisions that we can take are scary. Point is this: reversible decisions, once you make them, you can go back. Irreversible decisions, once you make them, you cannot go back, right? You got to make those decisions right, like marriage. Right? So that's my thing. So especially if you want to be a donkey, don't make a decision, and especially think a lot before you make a reversible decision. Why? Because you're a donkey. What is the right way to go about things? How not to be a donkey? Here's what you do. Think long term. Think 3, 4, 5, 6 month seasons, 2, 3 year long seasons, decade long seasons. You approach life in seasons. That's what you do. That's how you not be a donkey. That is step number 1. Step number 2. Yeah, I think I sort of covered both the things. Step number 3 is make a decision and make reversible decisions fast, right? Just make a decision. Just make one and go. One of the books I've read, or one of the books I keep with me all the time, is this book called Rework. And in that book, there is this idea, and by the way, for some context, Rework is a book about business. And it's probably one of the best books I've read on business, and I keep it on my table most of the time. I don't have it right now. Quite the irony right here. But in that book, there is a concept called making decisions equals making progress. We often say perfectionism is not the way to go. Progress over perfectionism. Great. How do you make progress? You make decisions, and that is making progress, right? So if you want to make progress in your comic, make a decision and get started. It's like, I need ink, or do I need a color? Do I need ink? Do I need a color? No, just pick one, go with it, and just make progress. You'll sort of know eventually down the line that you should have probably inked first before you put on the colors. That is a lesson that only comes through experience. See, the car guy agrees with me if he can hear us honking. So yeah, especially when you're making a decision, know that making decisions equals making progress. So the more the amount of decisions and the more the number of decisions you can make, the more progress you can make. My friends, this This understanding that I have right now, I did not have this understanding 2 years back. And this probably actually came from me trying hard to run a team, manage a team, run a studio, make revenue, make art projects, keep myself happy, keep other people happy, Sort of the lesson sort of comes from there, which is through experience. Because I've heard of this concept before, and I've heard a lot of these concepts before, but none of these things, you only sort of know them by memory, right? You don't truly internalize them to a point where there is a change in your behavior. Because what is the point of learning something if you don't use that thing? Because you're just a memory bank at that point, you just Google. Might as well Google things then. So true point of learning is to actually initiate behavior change. Same condition, different behavior. I'm connecting a lot of dots and concepts right here. That is interesting. Anyways, that is the thing. Don't be a donkey, folks. A lot of you folks might be in this situation. I was in this situation. I still am in this situation, but I think I've made a decision. I have made a decision. See, I think I have made a decision. That is the problem. Make a decision. The word decision actually apparently comes from some Latin word which basically means to cut off from. To make a decision means you choose one thing. It's a two-part process. You choose one thing, but you voluntarily say no to other things. So when you're making a decision, what you need to do is you need to know two things. What are you saying yes to, and what are the things that you're saying no to? And this is a mistake I used to do. I used to say yes to things, but I stopped saying no to other things, which is technically saying no to your current decision as well. So then that means, my friend, Keshav, especially a lesson to you. How do you make a decision? You say yes to something and know what you're saying no to. That is the idea for the day, the idea for the weeks, folks. That is a podcast. Awesome. I like doing these things. The more I talk, the more I learn. Maybe y'all should do a podcast and see if this works for you. Right? Thank you. Anyway, thank you for listening. Thank you for your time. Subscribe to the newsletter, folks. I don't ask a lot of things. If you really want to sort of if you want to know more from me, and eventually, I don't know, how is it going to, you're going to get me more views on my newsletter. Probably that is a thing. So if you want to know more of these ideas in a much more shorter form, subscribe to my newsletter, 3-Point Thursdays, where I send like 3 ideas such as this that I find interesting every single week that is helpful for me on the newsletter. I am a fellow learner such as yourself, and we'll see how things goes. Anyways, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. I'll see you guys next week with a different thing. Bye-bye.
Grinding, money on my mind, and I'm headed to the top. I won't stop until I find it. Write my name in diamonds, but all these lights are blinding. I wonder, is it worth it? Feel like I'm losing my mind.